Hello and welcome to FatbossTV. Loz here again today, and today we're looking at Korag on Heroic in the Highmaul. And to start off, I want to say that this boss was really enjoyable to test. It was very enjoyable. The mechanics of this fight aren't that complex, but the way that they work with each other is very interesting, and it made it a very fun encounter in my opinion. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It doesn't only test your healers with a few mechanics, but there's also a couple of things that people need to do personally, which includes soaking orbs and shit so the raid doesn't die, which is really fun. It's a really good boss. But with all these videos, let's start off and let's talk about all the mechanics. So throughout the entire fight, the boss will constantly expel magic, and he'll either do fire, frost, arcane, or shadow. Now fire, this is just a dot that it places on every single target in the entire raid that deals ticking damage every second for 10 seconds. However, when it expires, it does a large amount of fire damage to all allies within 5 yards. So the idea of this debuff is that when it does get to the end of its duration, you need to make sure that you're stood near no other targets, because if you do, you're going to kill them. The amount of damage it deals is very high. And because it does go on every raid member, it means that melee also have to move away, which is a real pain because obviously they get downtime. However, it was listed in the dungeon journal that this ability was dispellable. I don't know if that's what they have planned for live, but if that's the case, you'd probably have all your healers individually dispel or mass dispel the melee, so they don't have to move out. Now, his Expel Magic Arcane was only ever going on the tank. Now, what this will do is that it will mark the tank's current location every 0.5 seconds for 10 seconds. And after 1.5 seconds, that marked location will explode, dealing a huge amount of damage, almost one-hit damage, to anyone within 5 yards of that area. And if you do get hit, you'll also get a debuff that increases the amount of physical damage you take by 100%. So obviously you do not want to get hit by this by a tank, because the boss is constantly dealing physical damage to you with his melee hits. So when a tank is targeted by this, the other tank needs to taunt the boss, and that tank needs to run away from the raid as far as you possibly can and try not kill the raid with the marked locations, and anyone needs to move away from the tank. Just to help the tank, I suppose you can give speed increases, but it didn't feel necessary. Now, Expel Magic Frost is just a frost orb that gets sent out that deals damage to any players that are nearby, and the orb lasts for roughly 20 seconds. The closer you are to this orb, the slower you actually become within 30 yards of it. If you move 30 yards away, you actually are no longer snared and your debuff is removed. However, if you use Windwall Totem or Stampeding Roar, this will actually remove it as well, which was kind of interesting. That's all there is to that Expel Magic. Just move away from the orb, simple as that. Now, the main one, the most challenging one out of all of them at least, was Expel Magic Shadow. When the boss casts this, he puts a healing absorb shield on the entire raid for about 140k. So with this mechanic, it's really important that you use some sort of massive healing cooldown after it comes in. So either Trank or Healing Tide Totem. We tried to only use one each time. Occasionally we did need to use two instead. But that's all it is to that mechanic. It's simple, but it's probably the most deadly. Also, throughout the fight, the boss will target random players and cast an ability called Suppression Field. This seems to only ever target range. What he'll do is that he'll run over to his target and do a large slam on top of their face, which will deal a large amount of arcane damage in an 8-yard area, and it will leave this field of suppressing energy. One thing to note, anyone that's inside the suppressing field will actually be silenced and will start taking ticking arcane damage. And this mechanic's actually used with another one later on in the fight. Now, as you may have noticed, the boss does actually have a buff on him called Nullification Barrier. Now, this barrier absorbs all magic damage that he takes. And it's stated in the dungeon journal as 5 million, however, it does scale to the amount of players in your raid. I think we had 30 at the time, and it was almost 15 million. And while this barrier is up, the boss is constantly getting a damage increase every 10 seconds by 6%. And as soon as the shield does go, then that buff is removed as well. So the idea is that you do need to bring magical DPS, because they're the only people who can remove the shield. And ideally, because of the damage increase, you want to remove the shield as soon as you possibly can. Now, once you have actually removed the Nullification Barrier, the boss will charge to the middle of the room and will begin to recharge it, which takes roughly 20 seconds or so, and it will spawn a rune underneath him. Now, while this rune is active and the boss is recharging his shield, volatile anomalies will start to spawn throughout this time, roughly 3 every 8 seconds. Now, these ads can be stunned, they can be knocked back. However, they have one nasty mechanic. When they die, they do a large amount of AoE damage to the entire raid. However, they're inside the suppression fields that have been up throughout the fight as you've been going along. When they die, they won't do any damage to the entire raid because they're silenced by it. So as you can see, when this phase does kick in, pretty much the entire raid goes and stands behind a suppression field, and then that way all the ads are more or less in them immediately, because the tank's on the other side as well, and you can just tank them inside that and just kill them as soon as you possibly can. Using things like Vortex with knockbacks here is awesome as well, because you can keep them inside there, and the tank doesn't need to go inside them himself. So far, it seems all relatively simple, and it doesn't seem like anything's particularly dangerous about the fight, and this is where it changes, really. Throughout the fight, the boss will be spawning these overflowing energies. Now, what these will do, they're just orbs that come down from the sky. You can see where they're going to land, and if you're stood on top of where it's going to land, it will do about 1.5 million arcane damage. This is just going to insta-kill anyone. However, if no one gets hit by it, it'll just hit the ground, it'll explode, and it'll do 70,000 arcane damage to everyone in the entire raid. So the idea is that you need to absorb it. However, this effect pierces all immunities and damage reductions, so you can't just stand in there and use deterrence or bubble or anything like that. You'll just die, you just flat out die. However, players can actually get the nullification barrier that the boss has. When the boss charges in the middle to charge up his rune, one player can go inside and start getting the shield as well. However, while the player is inside there, they also take ticking damage and receive 35% less healing. The longer that player stands in the rune, the stronger their own nullification barrier will become. And the biggest nullification barrier you appear to be able to get is 15 million, which means if you do stand in there for the full duration, you'll be able to soak 10 of these little orbs that come out. So you're probably thinking it sounds kind of simple. All you really need to do is get one of your players to go inside the room with the boss, get his shield up, spam heal him so he doesn't die while he's getting it, and then all he needs to do is go soak these orbs. And that's essentially, it is simple. That's what you need to do throughout the whole fight. However, the amount of orbs that are spawning, there'll always be one more than you can actually soak. So the idea is that the raid does take damage, but as the fight progresses, you'll have more and more orbs, but of course more and more people could then go and get the shield, because the shield lasts the entire fight, and you just get one player to do it each time, but every time one player does go and get one, a new orb will spawn. So the idea is that throughout the fight, you need more and more people to soak, and if any of them fail to soak, when the orbs do land, it just becomes more and more deadly. When it gets to the point where 3 orbs or 4 orbs are up and you don't soak any of them, that's going to be a wipe, because the amount of AoE damage that is dealt to the raid will be far too high. Whereas if everyone soaks correctly, only 1 orb will land and you can deal with only 1 orb landing. It's not a big deal. But that's essentially the fight. It's pretty much just bring enough caster DPS so you can break the shield as soon as you possibly can without getting too many of the damage increase stacks, because the damage increase stacks plus like his Expel magic abilities can be really nasty, especially with like fire and shadow. And also to the suppression fields, if you don't move out of them quickly enough, you're going to take a lot of damage as well. And then when it does break and the boss does charge into the middle, I mean, we always got the hunters to take the buff. They can move around and do DPS the entire time. They're pretty much the perfect people for it, really. They need to get the rune, and then they need to soak up all these orbs, while the rest of the raid just deals with all these ads that spawn. After that 20-second period, you'll still have to soak orbs, but the ads will no longer spawn, and the fight will go back to normal. The boss will continue to do his Expel magic, he'll continue to do his suppression fields, and that's more or less it. It just repeats from that point. So it's not overly complicated, it's just, I personally just really like it. I think it's a really fun fight, and it's going to be cool to see how it's going to work out on Mythic. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little preview, please do drop us a like, as always. And we will see you on the live stream. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.